Welcome. My name is Dr. I used to teach at Sac City, but now I'm going to teach at Chico State. Just want to let you know who I am. I'm from Sacramento. I'm an enrolled member of the Normal Winter Tribe, which is up north. I'm also Hoopa and Chicana. But I'm pissed. I'm mad. My whole family is in our house just pacing, waiting for something to pop up. So you decided to come out here, like all you did. Y'all made a conscious decision to come out here. We stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, with George Floyd, and we're tired of this shit. I am tired of seeing our people, our brothers and sisters, our family members being killed on national TV, and they replay that shit over and over and over again. I'm tired of it. I'm happy to be out here with y'all. One thing I do want to say is that we are a community. We should know each other. My name is Vanessa. You can say hi to me. My sister Maya, Morningstar. Say hi to each other. But we need to know who we are. We need to know each other. So any other people out there that want to just come say something, get it off your chest, because this feels fucking good. But I said my piece, and thank you all for coming out, and I hope to see you all in the streets. Oh!
I'm a professor of ethnic studies, multicultural and gender studies, and American Indian studies. I've been teaching for a very long time, and I've constantly talked about the statues and the constant reminder to our youth, our Native community, how it's a huge, not only just slap in the face, but it's a rendering of the wrong history and a continued memorialization and idolization of a false narrative that continually takes out the Native oral traditions, our histories, our representations, and for example, the Miwok, Maidu, and Nisenan people who are home to this land that we stand on. This is a big thing. I think that it's a big step in the way that we are showing people that there is an alternative history here. It's a big step for my daughter, Weejay Meza, who is 6 years old, to see what activism can do. It is a big deal to my community to show that not just the Native community, but the Sacramento community. I am a Sacramento resident. I've been born and raised in Sacramento. That Native peoples are still here today, and I think that's one of the biggest things that always is erased from these statues, from the narrative, is that we are here today thriving, doing our ceremonies, doing our languages, and now we get to say that we took part in taking down the statue.
Yeah, Hestam, Vanessa Esquivido. I am an enrolled member of the Normal tribe, which is up there in Northern California. I'm also Hoopa, which is even north from Wintu area. I'm also Chicana. My dad is Mexican American. So those are kind of my roots. My tribe is not federally recognized, as a lot of my doctoral work focused on non-federal recognition, which is a lot, you know, through the nation. Let's see what else. I just started a job, yay me, during the pandemic.
Congratulations.
They made a bitch scared though. They was like not telling me if I got the job or not. They're like, so I finally got the, you know, yeah, the job. Thank you. And so I'm a professor, assistant professor of multicultural and gender studies and American Indian studies at Chico State.
Today's topic is we're talking about Black Lives Matter and how is that impacting Native American communities. This particular week, you know, the students had a chance to reflect upon their first experiences of racism. When do they become like actually aware of when racism was impacting their lives? And for me, it was just always present. I was always the mixed blood in both sides of my family. I was the whitest of all the Navajos in Sand Springs. When I was in Jersey, I was the darkest and most Asian looking of that community members. And so I kind of stuck out like a sore thumb. And I learned that, at least for me, that I hear a lot of people talking about walking in both worlds, right? So walking in two different worlds. And for me, the way that it was brought up for me is that there's not two worlds, you only have one. It's what you decide to put into it. And so that's how I've been raised in bringing together those types of concepts of race, since they were very much in my face growing up. And so it was wonderful to read your guys' experiences. Everybody is very unique, and when they became very aware of how race impacted their lives. And so we had a chance to take a look at blood quantum as well, which Vanessa is also very much in tune with, and the complications of blood quantum. For example, my husband is Tewa and Navajo, but he's only 50% Indian, right? And we took a look at how the blood quantum status established by the Navajo Nation is still based off colonial projects of termination. And so we were able to take a look at that, as well as our own criteria, how we should start establishing our own, if we should go back to a matrilineal society definition of what Navajo is, which becomes complicated, right? Because then we start taking a look at all these individuals whose mothers aren't Navajo, and now they would no longer be considered Navajo if we considered that matrilineal society. So I want to thank you guys for really hanging in there. I know it's a fast 5-week class. Vanessa has been part of the Black Lives Matter movement. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to bring her in is because we started getting into discussions with my own friends that actually kind of hurt some of my friendships about, you know, well, why does this matter? And for us as Navajos, at least in our community, and Vanessa, we're coming in from different areas of the reservation in Saley, Black Lives Matter, it hasn't impacted us. And we've been like in the thrusts of the coronavirus. People are just passing away. It was just, for me, when I started talking about it and had a moment to breathe and say, okay, well, what's going on? And we don't have cable. And KTNN doesn't really talk about Black Lives Matter, besides the fact it's a terrorist associated with a terrorist organization. That's our tribal radio station. And I'm like, all right, so what's going on here? And I remember people saying like, Christine, like, how are you not engaged in this? And I was like, I'm not. I am trying to make sure my students don't die, and trying to take a look at these other realities that aren't impacting our community. And then I started realizing, you know, this Black Lives movement, and it's actually because of Vanessa and Vanessa's activism that started making me really think about how Black Lives Matters impacts Indigenous realities. And so it was a wonderful eye-opening experiences. I was able to talk with individuals who took a look at these different realms of protesting and what protesting can do and how that ties in with decolonization, right? Because decolonization isn't just blab in your mouth. It's about actually going out and doing something. And what we see happening now, that's where I wanted to take a look off. So I'm gonna go ahead and share screens right now so that we can take a look at one of these talks that Vanessa was doing. It started raining here, so I hope you guys can hear everything. I will put everything on loudest audio as possible.
So I got started with Black Lives Matter a long time ago. I've been very interested in the movement. I remember the first time I seen the hashtag Black Lives Matter, and I think I did have a reaction where I'm like, hey, my life matters too. Like, not necessarily like all lives matters like instantly, but like an instant like, hey, I'm Native, I'm also Mexican, like, wait. And so I remember having that moment of like pause, and then like just taking a second and actually going to their website, reading their mission statement. And that was the first thing I did when I seen that several years ago, in 2015, 16. And then something that, instead of like instantly posting, like just researching for a second, like taking a second, being like, okay, why was my reaction like that? And then, really investigating. And I think that's what's happening now a lot, is reflection. Reflection is happening so much. 2020 is the year of reflection. We've all had a lot of time on our hands. And just sitting down and thinking about it. And so really getting kind of immersed in the movement, I started just paying attention to the movement at first. My first action with Black Lives Matter was in the protest just recently. The one that you just showed was a protest that happened at Cesar Chavez Park in Sacramento. So George Floyd was, we say lynched. We don't say murdered. We say lynched because it was a lynching. It was on national TV. It was broadcasted everywhere. We seen him die, which is what I actually talk a lot about in the I don't know if you're all able to hear all the words I said in the thing, in the speech I gave, but it's our Black and brown bodies that continually be played on loops when we die. We're the ones who are constantly focused in on. We don't see that with white murders. We see that with brown and Black people. And so seeing George Floyd, and I refuse to actually rewatch those videos, but the fact that his death was on all the national news stations, just, I mean, like, it was okay. Like, we were just okay to watch him die. And eventually they started kind of on Facebook. I've noticed the first couple days it was open, and then the next couple days they started to blur out his face, or blur out kind of, I say that this is graphic content, but at first they didn't. And so that's why I was talking about in the speech I gave, that I was like, I'm mad. I'm actually really mad. I'm pissed. Rehearing some of my words gave me goosebumps because I still feel a lot of the same way. And so that happened on May 25th, was the lynching of George Floyd. On May 31st was the first protest I went to, which was organized by Black Lives Matter Sacramento. And me and my partner decided to go out there and march in the streets with people. And so we went down there. And the thing is that if you are watching the news from where I'm at in Sacramento, and I think a lot of the national news coverage of the protesting in response to George Floyd was that it wanted to scare you. It was saying that people are, and which is happening, right? Some people were being shot with rubber bullets. I know that happened actually in my community in Sacramento. So there was that level. But also at the same time, how beautiful that protest was. The several ones that I've been to, the community that is not shown on TV is gorgeous. We had people out there handing out free water, making sure that you're hydrated, people handing out granola bars, making sure, like, hey, are you hungry? Do you need something? The rallying around each other was phenomenal. There was continuous mental health check-ins saying, hey, being an activist is hard. Being out there, screaming at the top of your lungs and doing all of this work can take a toll on you, and in different ways. And so they would say, oftentimes over the loudspeaker or over the microphone, saying, hey, if you need a moment, you can go back to the park, Cesar Chavez Park, which is actually really important. I'll get back to that in a second. But take a breather, drink some water, and then come back. And so this constant check-in of checking in with each other and community. People would often say, introduce yourself to the person next to you. And this is during a global pandemic, right? Where majority of the people, 95% of the time I was out there, all had masks on. I know that it is a very different experience, especially maybe from where y'all are from, who has been hit very hard by COVID. We also have been, I think we're seeing a lot more, our numbers are climbing up now in Sacramento. I think we were hit a little bit later, but we are starting to see that huge spike now. But so far through the protesting, everyone's been wearing masks. We've been trying to, social distancing's not really happening, seeing how we're all out there moving together. So there is that moment where you're like, should I go out there during a global pandemic and protest? But for me, I felt like I was called to it. I needed to do that. I needed to be actionary. And yeah, so that was part of the reason why I went out there too. If y'all have questions during this, please chime in. This can be more of a conversation. I'm really interested in hearing what y'all think about this, or where you want me to spend more time talking about it. I can talk forever. So
Yeah, you guys can
please.
totally use the chat too. We have some. I think a really good question is a good question. A good question to start off with came from one of our students, Brianna, and this was one of the questions that I also had when I started really reflecting about, you know, why now? Like, why? Her question. She says, from my knowledge, Native Americans fought for the removal of, like, for example, Mount Rushmore, right? Since the Sioux Native Americans got their land back, the riot was silent until George Floyd's death. The BLM soon became number one news alongside COVID. The riot started. Many people started realizing that racism was a big issue. There was the football team names that decided to be changed. We worked through the process until they've gotten approved, and the statues are now starting to be destroyed. She puts by angry mobs. Why do all of these events happen at the same time, and why didn't they happen sooner? It's kind
That's
of
a really good
one, but it's a great one. Yeah, it's a great one.
I think several reasons. This moment where I think majority of people couldn't argue the point that what happened to George Floyd was a homicide, that it was a lynching, right? That most people aren't going to argue with that was like an okay act by the police, right? And so I think by that moment and the movement of Black Lives Matter going out to the streets, right? This people gathering and this collective anger that ends up happening from that. All of us have a lot of oppression that has been happening from settlers for a very long time, right? Indigenous folks, Mexican folks, Black folks, right? And so when we're all together and we start feeding off of each other, you really feel this energy of like, hey, for a very long time, we've been actually, you know, separated, or fighting almost against each other, or not really worrying about the next person's issues. When in reality, as much as solidarity, we stand with Black Lives Matter, we're actually benefiting from it as well. And that's one thing that's a bit, not necessarily problematic, but something that I do often point out. I've been doing a lot of interviews, and I try to point this out every single time I do an interview, although most of the time I get cut because I think I'm too radical. But anyways, they say, people will say like, well, why do Native peoples care now that Columbus is in the state capital? And I'm like, bitch, we've cared. We've been there. We've been saying this. It's just that who's listening? And I think for a very long time, people have not listened to Native people's activism, right? They've been able to hide in their own bubble. I think right now it is forcing people to see and hear us. And a lot of that is because of the Black Lives Movement momentum that has been pushed forward. And so you kind of see it like a gate, right? Like this gate that's been stressed, and Native activists, Black activists, Mexican activists have been pushing on that fence for a very long time. And finally, I think that the gate had broken. And now you're seeing all of this change. We're seeing finally children being taken away from those cages, from deportation centers. We are finally seeing activism for Native Americans with the removal of the R word from the football team. Or I've been in conversations with, I really hate saying it, but so forgive me, Squaw Valley. So I was gonna say S word Valley is now in conversation of changing the name. The activism, like Brianna was saying, right, has been there for years. But I think now, because of the momentum of Black lives, it's being pushed forward. And it's awesome because I think that we are all in solidarity. Today, I gave an interview for LA Times, which we'll see how that turns out, talking about the removal of a noose. Placerville County, actually, Christine, if you can like Google it real fast and just show the class, because it's a Placerville County logo. So the logo, the emblem for Placerville in California is a picture of a miner, a gold miner. Gold mining took place in California and really caused a lot of genocide, upon California Indian peoples. Our numbers were 150,000 population numbers pre-contact, and in a span of like 20 years, our numbers went down to 30,000 after the gold rush. But we praise the gold rush, right? We praise all that. We have the 49ers football team, right? We have all these cities that talk about gold mining in this really like positive light. But in reality, that caused genocide. Well, anyways, the emblem has a noose. A noose. Movement in Sacramento had started to point this out, saying, hey, this is really racist. And what ends up happening is they're starting to push forward of saying, hey, maybe we should rethink this emblem. And then, of course, the Placerville city starts to push back. And you know what they say is that, well, it's not for Black people. It's for anyone who was thought of as thieves at the time. They said, because of the gold rush, people would come in and steal gold. And so they said that the nickname for that town is actually called Hang Town. And that they would hang people if you were caught stealing. But we know systematically that the emblem, that picture of a noose, is for who? Brown and Black people. We know this. We know specifically in Placerville, in a gold mining place, that they lynched and caused huge amounts of genocide towards Native Indigenous people, the Miwok and Maidu people in that area. So when I drive by there and I see that emblem, do you think it's a city that I feel comfortable stopping and bringing my 6-year-old daughter to? Hell to the no. So it's these kind of logos. So we see Black lives pushing for it, but also the Native solidarity. And it's really this awesome solidarity right now.
I think, and because I think about that, and what one of our students have brought up, for example, with what's going on with the Washington Redskins, and I know that like my brothers are huge Redskins fans, and so I can understand that perspective. I truly can. But I remember when I was going to school over at University of Maryland, I remember the Native American group wanted me to always come protest over there, and that was like a decade ago. That they wanted me to come protest, and I said, absolutely not. I know you guys get spit on. I know you guys get physically abused and psychologically harassed for standing outside the stadium. I'm not going to do that to myself. I wasn't able to at that time step up and vocalize. And so when I see that emblem's now changing, I'm excited to see what happens and how that does change. But at the same time, I noticed that, right, capitalism and capitalistic backing is really what pushed that to the next foreground, right? How money talks, you know, because I know like some of my girlfriends have been out there protesting literally for decades, and here, you know, Amazon pulls their sponsorship, Nike pulls their sponsorship, but at the same time, why did they pull their sponsorship with Kaepernick? Right. And so I understand that those types of questions, like why now? What's the catalyst? And it's another way to take a look at it is why not now? Right? Why not now? And so how can we take advantage of that momentum and try to change society for hopefully what we consider to be the better, right? Another question that we do have.
I'm a Raider fan, and we're moving. So like things happen, and it sucks, but I mean, I'm not gonna, you know, stop supporting like my team, I guess, even though it's still supporting capitalism. But yeah,
you can move. But there's, you know, it's why not now, right? And so there's that component as well. We have another question that has come in, and just correct me if I'm wrong, but during the Martin Luther King marches or anything before that, I didn't hear of any natives that were part of those marches. Why do you think that there are natives now supporting BLM? And so that's one of her questions. And I think we touched on that.
I think that the representation. So we hear you typing, girl.
Yeah, we have a type.
So I think that there's always been solidarity between the Black community and the Native community.
Let's see. I'm trying to see if hey guys, can you do me a favor and let's see if we can meet everybody.
Perfect. So I think that we've always been there. I think there's always been a solidarity. I know for a fact during the American Indian movement and AIM and Black Panther Party were very much in solidarity together. We've seen Angela Davis walk with AIM. We've seen AIM actually participating in a lot of Black Panther, I would say even more than protests, right? Community. Morningstar Gailey, the one who I actually talked about in the speech I gave, and I pointed out to her. I know you can't see her on the video, but she's in a couple of my pictures I'll show in a minute because I do have some photos for y'all. Talked about how she was born at the AIM house. She's a Native woman. She is Pitt River. She's California native. But how the reason why a lot of them were fed was through the Black Panther Party. So I think there's always been solidarity. Martin Luther King, unfortunately, is like the most known, right? He's the biggest one. But at the same time, I am positive that Native peoples were also participating in those marches. It's just a lot of times the media doesn't necessarily give a shit to like record, but I'm sure there are photos out there. I am sure that there is solidarity there.
I do have a little bit to add on that. When I was over at Maryland, there was an anthropology professor, Aubrey Williams. He ended up leaving me. He was a really old professor, but he ended up leaving me his collections. And in his collections was a tremendous amount. He used to march with Martin Luther King, and he used to march with Native segments. So he's actually responsible. I know everybody talks about the chapter house systems here on the reservation. Aubrey was the guy who they sent out from Washington, D.C. to come help establish those chapter house systems out here. So when he moved back out on the East Coast, he was part of all those civil rights movement, and he kind of found his love with not just because of anthropology, but because of all of his time that he spent out in the Navajo Nation and working with Martin Luther King and those movements as well. So I think that it's a great research topic. So if anybody's interested in exploring that more in depth in graduate work, I think that would definitely be a wonderful, wonderful question to take a look at. Let's see, what else do we have? We have, what was first targeted statue to be removed for Black Lives Matter and the first for Native Americans? That's a good question, but I don't have the answer to. Yep.
This is not a good, it gets better. This is the bad part of the answer I have. There is a famous photo of people in South America pushing down a statue of a conquistador off the top. And I don't know which community it is, and that's where I need to actually find out so I can give you a better answer to that. Pushing off a statue. And I've seen, that's a pretty old photo. So statue removal has been happening for quite some time. The conversation about statue removal has been happening for quite some time. I know a couple of Black women in Georgetown, I believe, no, not Georgetown, maybe it was Georgetown, had done a photo in front of a very racist person, statue that is commemorating his contributions to gynecology. But what he had done was do all these really negative or terrible experiments on Black women, operating on them without anesthesia because he said that Black women didn't feel pain. So this idea that Black women's bodies were there for his disposal. And so what ends up happening is that a group of Black women had stood in front of that statue with like, you know, the robes you wear when you go to the hospital, those kind of like ropes. So those on with the blood splattered near their vagina. And, you know, it's a very powerful photo. It's in black and white, but the blood is actually turned pink in the photo. So it's very bright and it's very striking. You know, it really stops you in your tracks when you come across it. And so protesting against these statues have been happening for a very long time. And I want to say that one happened within the last 5 years. I know when Black Lives Matter, when this started happening, the first statue removal was actually not here in the United States. It was in Britain. They started taking down statues. So you see this vibration through the world that's happening, not just in the United States. And for Sacramento, because I know that a lot of the statues started toppling throughout the nation within the last couple months. But for Sacramento, the first one to be removed was Sutter. So Sutter is the settler that came into Sacramento area. He was He came in during when California was under Spanish rule, Mexico rule. And what ends up happening is that he really creates a huge fortune, especially with the gold rush. He creates it's called Sutter's Fort. Sutter's Fort still stands in Sacramento. We then name, right, like a bunch of things after him. So we see freeway exits at Sutterville exit, South Sutter, North Sutter. We have a Sutter hospital. So we have a whole ass hospital named after this guy. And so Sutter was the first statue to be removed in light of this last couple months. It was really cool because I posted a year ago, almost to I want to say I was 2 weeks off. Last year when I was teaching my students about John Sutter, I posted on my Facebook, John Sutter, I'm coming for you. I'm about to go rip you out, take you down. And literally a year later, his statue was removed because of the protesting there. Sutter was someone who was very violent and caused a lot of genocide towards Native people, the Miwok and Maidu and Nisenan peoples of the area. We, like I was talking about glorifying the gold rush, we continue to glorify that fort. A fifth grade project that majority of the students around there, I myself, dress up as pioneers and go to the fort and participate in this settler, parade thing. It's like a field trip that all the kids go to. Well, now we've protested against it. We've kind of got that taken down. But I want to say about 2 years ago, a little Miwok boy wore his regalia. He's like, I'm not going to dress up as a pioneer. I'm going to dress up, with my regalia and go to Sutter's Fort. And Sutter's Fort had stopped him and told him he wasn't allowed to come into the fort.
Wow.
So yeah, I know that made me so upset. We have been protesting Sutter for a very long time, but now this removal just happened, and it's fantastic.
We have another really good question that I think came up from our discussion board, and it's going back to taking a look at George Floyd and these exact media portrayals of Indigenous and brown and Black bodies. And so she asked, do you feel that if an Indigenous person was murdered in the same fashion that George Floyd was on camera, would you think that the video would go viral and that the people would have the same reaction?
That's a good question. I want to say yes, because the injustice of the video is so overt. But I think that the United States is invested in our death and dying. So part of me feels like maybe not, which is unfortunate. But I would hope so. Just because of the egregious way that this man was killed, right? I would hope so.
We hope so, but yeah, I mean, we're still in termination policy, and that's what I constantly stress to this class and a lot of the other classes, is that the United States government, besides, I mean, even if you take a look at release of care funds, or just systematically, everything is delayed, and we can call it tribal bureaucratic processes, but in the end, our government system, which is built on the United States government system, is based in termination. So those are the kinds of things that we have to think about, how that would be censored, right? How would that come out in the media and the censorship of those areas? Another question that we have, let's see. So do you think that if we all respect each other, if we respect one another, regardless of color, the number of police brutalities will decrease?
I think that's a basic politic, and I tell my students they're not allowed to say stuff like that.
Yeah.
We all just get along. Don't you think that we can stop racism? Yeah. Okay, next question. It's like that basic white shit that you get told to, that people excuse this idea that racism's happening. It's like, well, if we all just cared. You're right. That would be a perfect utopian society. If we all just gave a shit and racism wasn't a systematic oppression that's literally built into the government, and it's just like this way that we think about it. I think that's, something that we hear so much. That's the rhetoric that we hear, like the basic politicians running for office. We all just, lend a hand out. Okay, well then show it, and unfortunately that's, yeah, systematic racism is already built into the fabric of the United States. It's built off that. It thrives off that. So until we dismantle decolonize this whole motherfucker, then I can see some real change happening. I love, and I'm probably sure you've assigned it or at least talked about it, the decolonization is not a metaphor. Saying that like these things need to be actionary, right? You have to take action. You have to be uncomfortable in situations, and that's okay. I've been very uncomfortable in some of the situations I've been in this activist, and also some that I've found that have pure joy, but there are some uncomfortable conversations that we all need to have. I am an activist. I go out to many protests, but I am not perfect in my activism either. I also reflect on how I can do better in that. I went kind of sideways on that question, but anyways.
Sideways is always okay. It's always okay. How do you think that technology has helped to impact the movements, both the Black Lives Matter movements and the accompanying or side by side, or for us, our main agenda would be these indigenous changes that are taking place.
I just think connecting. I mean, literally the morning I went to and I did the interview with the SACB with the removal of Christopher Columbus. They did not tell us when they were going to remove him. They did not tell us a time, day, anything. I literally woke up that morning and seen a couple Facebook posts of saying, "Hey, they're removing Columbus." I got in my car and drove down to the Capitol, which is about 20 minutes away. So I mean, that's the only reason how I knew, is because someone had posted about it. And so I think that social media has been able to extremely mobilize us. Facebook isn't perfect either, right? But the thing is, though, is that I started following pages that do a lot of the organization. I started reaching out. I started putting my name in there, so they're able to reach out to me as well. But to create that network, I did a lot of that off social media.
I think, that self, right, doing all that hard work, that hard research, that's the hard part. I think this is a really great question coming from one of our students. So what's next, right? After the removal of statues, where do we go from here? What's our next step?
Land back. Run us that land.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
I was the one who asked the question, if we just all get along, and it was disregarded as white shit. So that's me. I asked that question. It's just that you watch the news, and then you see these people getting knocked down, and they are being killed. We do see that. But what were they doing to get arrested and be harassed is what I want to know, because I don't understand that part. If you follow the law and do what needs, if you're not violent or whatever, like the way we are taught respect growing up, we abide by the law, we listen to our elders, and we do as we're told without stepping out of line, then I guess my misunderstanding is, how do they end up on the ground? What were they doing? Were they breaking the law? Were they just attacked out of nowhere? Were they racially profiled?
Were they racially profiled?
Yeah, I mean, what, did they select them and say, "Oh, you're a Black person, I'm gonna knock you down, I'm gonna kill you"? I mean, that's what I want to know. What were they doing that led up to?
Oh, I don't follow the law. The thing is that we have to push back.
Mm-hmm.
We can't take the law as face value. Settler law enforces our death. It enforces, our confining to reservations for so long. Like, that's settler law. Like, all of our ancestors, our elders, our people have always been activists, have always fought, have always pushed back. And yeah, I'm going to fight back and push back. And if you're not okay with that, that's okay for you.
Okay, well, my grandfather's grandfather was Chief Manuelito. Okay. And one of the great chiefs that signed the Treaty of 1868, I think. And so I understand how it goes, I guess, in a way, like how we got from being nomadic to where we are now. And it is unjust. It's not fair.
Exactly.
And so what I'm trying to understand is what are people doing to piss off the police. I mean, I myself, I live near the reservation, and I watch people just walk around and do whatever they want to do. People get away with a lot of things near the reservation. I live right on the outside of the reservation, and it's just like a slap on the wrist. Sometimes I do want justice, and it's like, no, I don't know, it's mind-boggling to understand how the law works on the reservation and how it doesn't work off the reservation. And it's just like a broken system. And so
that's what we're saying. It is a broken system. That's allows us to be targeted is because of settler law. They actually took away our sovereignty for us to actually do any kind of justice to people who aren't part of the tribe that or tribal area that you're on. They took away that power. So yeah, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, and Christy, I think because your insight is actually like where I kind of got stuck at for a second, and it's where I was like, I need to turn to my friends and start asking this question, because I asked the same question. I said, well, what was that individual doing, right, that got him into that situation? And that's where I really sat down, and my husband, who's military trained, and he said it at that point, right, that it doesn't make a difference what he did to get into that, because we were talking about the hold, that the knee hold, the neck hold, and the difference between that, and we were discussing how that's used in a military format, and how the police officers from that particular district were trained by Israelis, which is who he was trained by, and how he utilized that tactic, and how it was misused, and it shouldn't be used in that particular situation or at all as a police officer. That's something that you go in and you're looking to actually do harm. And when somebody is on the ground, and this is what, like I said, I had to have this explained to me, and here I am, this 37-year-old woman who has this, keen eye for critical thinking, and I got stuck there because I was like, well, how did this individual get to this particular spot? And so I was doing more background on him than I was actually on what was going on with that particular scenario, and how, the police were supposed to be working in partners, and the police were supposed to be checking in. When you see somebody lose in those types of high tension arenas, your partner is responsible for pulling you off. Your partner is supposed to help you pull off. So I see exactly where you're coming from, because I totally got stuck there. And it took me a hot second to back up and say, all right, well, that's not the point right now. The point is the fact that this was A, videotaped, A, that it took place to begin with. That when you have somebody who's on the ground like that, and they're not fighting, why was it okay for them to continue in that fashion? And the BLM's response, and many indigenous people's response, is going to be, it's because he's brown. It's because he's black. And that's why it was okay to A, keep him down on the ground like that, and B, to videotape it and to publicly portray that individual's death in that fashion. But I totally get where you're coming from. And so those are the things that I
Blackness is a huge thing within Native communities. It's a huge thing within Mexican communities. It's a huge thing across the nation, that we have been taught to fear Black individuals, and for us to investigate that for ourselves, I think would mean a lot. So I don't know if you think that I'm against what you're saying, but I think that the media has often portrayed protesting in ways that show us as violent, as negative, and it's not. Some of it, and the revolution, maybe we might need to burn some shit down, and I think that's okay too. I know that's a strong politic for a lot of people, but hey, we all get there at different times. And decolonization, as we're talking about, means that we need to remove some of these structures that continually oppress brown and Black people.
Okay, well, thank you. I just didn't agree with you saying that it was white shit to me, because there was more behind it, and I do get
basic white politics, though.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is. I mean, the kumbaya, let's all get along. Yeah, that would work out great. But really, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a couple of people in my neighborhood get pulled out of their vehicles, but they were running from the police, and I watched it right outside of my doorstep, and I was like, okay, well, shit. So it was like they just got pulled out, and I do understand. My mom was standing there recording it, saying, "You're not supposed to do that," and I was like, okay. I mean, I'm not against. I guess I'm. How would you say it? I don't have a pro side and I don't have a con side. I'm just right in the middle, and that's probably my problem. Is that I'm not picking a side. It's just that I'm at this point I'm not really investing my time into the media portion of what's going on out there. Excuse me, going on out there, but I probably should see what's going on. But I do thank you for your insight. It is very insightful, and I'll take a look into um, the events that are happening. I'm not keeping up.
We all do. I hope that we
Yeah.
all. Chrissy, could you let me share my screen so I can show some photos?
I can do that. Okay, there you go, Vanessa.
Perfect. So I'm gonna show you some photos that that have been kind of. They were in order, but when I collected all of them, it kind of went away. That's all right. So I'm going to show you a couple photos from the activism that I've been doing. This is an interview that was being done. I was talking about changing the name for S-Word Valley. The activism and a lot of the BLM and the Indigenous Solidarity has been taking place on Cesar Chavez Park. And so I am pretty sure that you should know who Cesar Chavez is, but if you do not, check him out. But he really led the farm worker movement in California. And so when they went to name this park in Sacramento, a lot of white people said that they didn't want to name this park Cesar Chavez. And so it was activism from the community in the 60s and 70s to push to name this park Cesar Chavez. And so I think it's really important that the movement is centered at Cesar Chavez Park here in Sacramento. We can see BLM on the back on the fountain there. One of my favorite protests that I've been to so far is called Black and Brown Shut It Down, where it was Black and Brown destinies are intertwined. We call for the healing of communities. Gotta move this, because Black liberation is Brown liberation, and so this is going towards the idea that Indigenous people for Black Lives Matter needs to support each other. This protest was amazing. They had Aztec dancers in the front. They had a community person from the land who are on a Miwok elder come and talk to the whole community, which was fantastic. Albert Titman is his name. We also had a huge community. They are really reinforcing community. You know, I live in a big city. There's a lot of people, and so they're saying you should know each other, which was really fantastic. This is myself and my partner and my stepson, John. These are our friends from work, Merdokios and Mel. I work at Costco Wholesale. I've been there for 16 years. I am part of the working class. And I went around to everybody at Costco and said, hey, are you going to the BLM Black Lives Matter protest? I got a lot of answers. I got a lot of pushback, but I'm willing, and I'm always the one will be able to ask those hard questions to people. One of the guys I often get into arguments with is named Cowboy. I'm sure you can understand why. But yeah, he didn't want to go. But I was able to motivate some of the people from work to go. A lot of people don't know where to start. A lot of people will say they are scared, like we were talking about the media showing this really negative, violent acts, but in reality, it's a beautiful community-based organization or organized, not organization, but organized event. And so we see a lot of artwork also coming out of this. So this is on the corner across the street from Cesar Chavez Park. And in reaction to a lot of the looting that was happening from protesters, majority of businesses down in Sacramento started putting up plywood across their windows and doors. And I have several thoughts about that, but this idea of protecting capitalism, I find really problematic. people are always saying like, well, what about the mom and pop stores? But you sure didn't give a shit about the mom and pop stores when gentrification was happening. It seems like we pick and choose which kind of capitalism that we find is okay at the moment or is benefiting us. Don't get me wrong, I'm on a MacBook in a Hyundai car, right? Like, I'm not completely decolonized myself, but it's something I am very aware of and think about. No justice, no peace is a huge slogan from this movement. And so someone had painted across the plywood, and there's a lot of actually plywood art. Sacramento was rated as one of the most diverse, or the most diverse city in the nation in 2012. We lost, I think we're number 10 now, but we're still very diverse. There is a huge Hmong population within Sacramento, Asian population, Russian, Ukrainian, Armenian, Mexican, Black. I mean, I've literally went to school with every kinds of races, and I love seeing stuff like this, right? Like the solidarity from across groups, not just Native. This is my other friend from Costco that I got to come with us to come protest with us, and she brought her daughter. This is my sister and her baby. This is a little Anahoy there. And we all decided to take our children out. The first couple days we decided not to because we were unsure. But then when we kind of seen the atmosphere, we felt very comfortable bringing our children. That's my daughter on my back. She's wearing a Mauna Kea shirt. That's my daughter and my niece. That's my partner and me, and then my sister and her partner. This was at the National George Floyd protest, the one that went kind of across the whole nation. We all marched on the same day. This is what the park looked like. The park is actually, Cesar Chavez Park is actually really small. And I don't think they realized how many people were going to come out for the huge national George Floyd protest. I would say there was about 20,000 people that came out that day. We walked a mile around the Capitol and back to Cesar. We started like near Cesar Chavez Park, walked a mile around the Capitol, and came back to Cesar Chavez Park. When we met back at Cesar Chavez Park, it filled up very fast, like too fast, and there was just still people coming. Just huge amounts of support that have been poured out in the streets. Something that's really motivated people to go out to the streets and protest. This is the removal of the Columbus statue from the Capitol. This is our professor, Sanajini. I'm probably saying that wrong, so I know I'm over here messing up names, so my bad. But this is an interview that professor did with me in front of the Capitol when they were removing the statue. What ended up happening was a Christian group came and started saying that we needed to go back to our own countries. We needed to, started saying all kinds of racist stuff towards us. They came with no masks on. They came spewing a lot of hate. They are talking about how Black people have abortions. And we're like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, what does this have to do with anything? And then we decided to sing the Woman Warrior song. So we started singing together, the Native people that were there. Well, then the Christian group started singing hymns, Christian hymns. I took that as a stance of violence because the bringing Christianity to Native peoples, and I just imagine like my ancestors being in that same moment with these Christian songs being sung at them, but used in a way that was more for violence and oppression than it was to be accepting into this into Christianity. This is me and Morningstar, the day that we talked about changing the name for S-Word Valley. You can see in the background, this is Cesar Chavez Park. We had a beautiful mural for Black Lives Matter, and just for people who wanted to come and bring things to the mural. Well, it was burnt down by white supremacists and had been destroyed. We've since we fixed it. I'll show you that one in a second. This is what it looks like now. So we were able to put more signage and other materials for people on the memorial part. Let's see. This is also from them taking out Columbus. You can see Columbus and Princess Isabella there in the background being removed from the state capitol. This is my friend Donna. She's Apache. She was my student at a time at Sac City College. So it's really cool to kind of protest with my former students. And then on the far right is my cousin. She's Pomo. It's me, Professor Sanajini. This is what I wanted to show you. So the artwork on the walls have been fantastic. So this says the media's most powerful is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent, and that's power because they control the minds of the masses. So we're seeing a lot of activism art coming through. This is painted on the plywood of a liquor store. This is a catty corner from the park over here, and then across was the No Justice, No Peace. So George Floyd. This was the national protest that kind of went around. This is my sister at Black Lives Matter. This was the memorial before it was burnt and destroyed. This was some other person's artwork that they wanted people to come and write as if a Black person was holding the face of a cop. What would you yell at the cop? And people were writing down their thoughts, and the artist said you can write wherever you want, but I noticed how many people wrote on this, right? I mean, I didn't count, but it seems like a lot, and none of us wrote on the cop's face. We just really want to be heard, and I think that's a very powerful statement, because she allowed us to write on the cop's face, but we didn't.
Like, why is all this happening, like, during a pandemic? And like, for me, I think it's stressful in a way, because like people like come together and then to raise awareness, but it also brings something back. Like I said, we're in a pandemic, so if they're together, like, social distancing is what they're not following, and if they come back with the virus, if they catch it, it can be life-threatening to the person. And listening to this, I kind of think that it's really heartwarming that people are actually protesting for one another. And it's very emotional for me, because a lot of people out there don't really understand how much, like, Native American and Black Lives matter. And this statement is just more of like, I enjoyed watching the video and listening in on your thoughts as long as with Miss Almy. Thanks.
No, thank you. I think you bring up great points. I mean, it is an emotional and thing that's happening, right? I mean, we all don't live in these boxes by ourselves, right? We feel things, and I think that's really important to talk about the emotional stance of deciding to go and not go. And I know everyone can't go, and I know that it is a global pandemic, and we need to take care of ourselves first, and our families, right? Our elders. But for me, and this is a decision that I had to make and justify, that I was going to go out there and protest. And I'm not saying everyone needs to, but I'm thinking that people need to participate in their own ways. And whether that's reposting things on Facebook, sharing stuff, sitting down and talking with your elders about how Black Lives Matter, all of those things are activism. And I think it's really important. And thank you for centering that back down for me. I appreciate that.
I was just wondering if, with the whole riot and everything turning to violence, has there ever been a peaceful protesting that has, how would you, I guess, like, successful? Has there been a peaceful protest that has been successful to where your voice has been heard?
I mean, all of the ones I've been to has been peaceful. The first protest I ever went to ended up in face-to-face with the cops, and people started throwing water bottles at the cops, and the entire crowd turned on that person and said, "Don't do that shit." So actually, majority of all the protests I've been to have been very peaceful. I think police are the ones that make it not peaceful. They're the ones actually enacting a lot of the violence and intimidating. Because if they weren't there, we wouldn't have stopped. We would have just kept marching. Like, it was and I feel like our voices are being heard. I mean, they're taking out Columbus out of the state capital, which was a gift from the Spanish. So I'm seeing a lot of successful things happening from peaceful protesting. Also, we did rip down Sarah, though. We did rip down Junipero Serra from the state capitol as well. That one was ripped down during a protest. but the other ones were removed by the state. So we're seeing, these gives and goes.
I was just gonna point out about that John Sutter. You said that a lot of things were named after him. He would cause a lot of violence and genocides. I was gonna add on to that. Oh, sorry, my grandma's talking. On our side, the Navajo Nation, during the Long Walk and the Treaty of 1868, of what Christine Manuelita was talking about, we also have an individual who caused all of that violence here. His name was Kit Carson, and today, we have a street named after him in Fort Defiance. And I don't know if all the Navajos are okay with it, because you guys are obviously against Sutter's act and actions that he did during the gold rush, and you guys are really excited to have his statues removed. Are you guys on any chance deciding to change names of the streets and the places that were named after him?
I mean, I hope so. I hope that there's a ripple effect. We've been trying, we're trying to pick out some of the bigger fights right now. Removal of the fort. And yeah, I'm really hoping to see a movement towards renaming some of these places. Mashana Goman is a fantastic professor at UCLA and talks about the settler grammar of place. So the fact that you have a street named after Kit Carson is a remnant of that violence. And you really it becomes normalized when you start to think about it, like, wow, like that's really not okay. So pushing for that change of the name of the street will be a great part of moving towards some activism on in your own spaces, whether that's changing it by yourself, going out there with a Sharpie, or putting a post on a post on Facebook saying, hey, what do y'all think about changing the name? And sometimes people are not going to agree with you, and that's okay.
I have a question. I'm not sure how many of us are parents, but I know these movements have been broadcast everywhere, especially on the news, and how do you all explain this to your children? Especially if it being native, and it does impact all of us. How do you explain it to them?
I'm very upfront with my daughter. Sit down and talk to her. I mean, she comes home with a lot of the settler rhetoric already built in, and she's only in, she's only in first grade. So she'll come home and say, like, cops are good. I'm like, not all cops are good. And just having conversations with her and telling her, they're not nice to everybody. They're actually can be very violent. And, I don't need to tell her everything all at once. She's 6, but at the same time, I do have those real conversations. I think that it's something that needs to be taught. Our history, what happened here in the United States, the genocide that happened to Native peoples, needs to be taught in school as well. We've been pushing for the curriculum change, the shift of starting to teach, about this to our children. We're often rebutted against people saying, well, that's too much for kids to know. But like, well, Native kids actually know. So why is that fair that Native kids get to learn about this genocide or what happened here, and other kids get to be free of that knowledge? So yeah, just sitting down, having those real conversations. Kids, they'll say the things that are so profound sometimes, and they're so honest. And so having those conversations, I think, is really important. Yeah, we don't have to start genocide, kindergarten, but we can definitely talk about those things later on. And then also, just not talking that everything was just great here, that, Pilgrims and Native peoples were totally besties. Like, that just narrative doesn't need to be taught anymore.
Dr. Ami?
Yes.
This is Earlson. Hi. I have a question for Vanessa.
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, Vanessa. My name is Earls Manson. I would like to formally introduce myself. Yad Eshe Earls Manson Yanishya Tachini Nishlingo Badani Bashichin Glizalana E Dashache Do Tohana E Dashana. Those are my 4 clans in Navajo. I just thought I'd say thank you for actually making Native American awareness a thing in the Black Lives movement. And my question is, I heard this a lot recently, and it just kind of dawned on me right now, but would you think that the Black Lives Movement in this moment is considered the new civil rights movement?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
First off, thank you so much for your formal introduction. And I love hearing our native languages on Zoom. Like, we are modern and we're keeping our traditions alive, and that's so badass. So thank you. I appreciate you so much. And yes, I think that, I keep seeing memes, and well, there's a lot of memes, but I keep thinking about, people see civil rights as something that's very, and literally and figuratively, black and white.
Yes.
Wow, that was really messed up that, black people couldn't drink from the same fountains from white people, right? Like, we see that and be like, that's messed up. That's easy. That's point. But people had what they're having right now is that conflictions.
Mm-hmm.
It's the young people talking to their parents saying, actually, no, black people are actually people. Native people are actually people. And I think that it's the same thing that's happening right now. And I'm sure those white parents said the same thing about the civil rights movement, right? Like, oh, they're out here, congregating, they're coming together. I mean, that used to be against the law for Native peoples and for black peoples to actually just come together. They weren't even allowed to come together. And so we know that people were saying the same things that they're saying right now, that, hey, this is getting out of hand, or seeing the violence or the negativity of it. But there's so much positivity coming out of it too. So I think that, yes, this is very much a civil rights. This is going to go down in history. You will remember this during a global pandemic, and the movement of Black Lives Matter will be in our children's textbooks.
Yeah.
And so I think that, what we do right now is what we get to tell our great grandkids later on.
Yeah. And one aspect that I really like about the movement as well was also, I guess you could say, an add-on of the LGBTQ community as well.
I think that I apologize for not bringing that up, because there has been.
No, it's fine. It's a topic that I talk about a lot as well.
LGBTQIA involvement and trans, specifically Black trans, specifically, have been leading these movements. And
the actual first protest, the gay pride, was from a Black trans from New York City.
Yes. And so I think that that's really important to bring up. And I apologize just for everybody that I didn't bring that up sooner. And thank you, Earl, for bringing that in, because that is so important.
Okay, thank you so much for your information. It's really nice to hear from you, and it was very informative, and you are doing amazing work.
Thanks, you too.
My name is Amanda. I was wondering, as an activist, besides the BLM movement, have you participated in other movements? Like, I know they have the missing and murdered Indigenous women. Have you any thoughts about that?
Yes, I think I've been doing activism for a very long time. The reason why I had made that skirt, it's out of red poppies, was to bring awareness for the missing murdered Indigenous women as well. I teach a lot about that. I do a lot of activism around that. I talk a lot about that in association with the law and how that allows for more missing murdered Indigenous women. It's the settler law that allows that. So we need to shift those things. I think that I've done activism for water rights, especially up north, where farming and Indigenous people end up kind of really bumping heads. Farmers want the water for farming, but Indigenous people need the water up, like where my family's from, the Hoopa Yurok people, who need the water to do our ceremonies. So we've done a lot of activism around that. Like Christine was saying, the R word football team, that's been a huge thing for a very long time. I don't know more. Pua Case from Mauna Kea. I actually sat down and had a lunch with Pua Case, who led the Mauna Kea. So if you don't know what Mauna Kea is, go look it up. It's the mountain in Hawaii that they're fighting for, because Berkeley's trying to put a huge telescope on their sacred land in Hawaii. And then Sylvia McAdams, who helped with I Don't Know More and the rights up there in Canada. And I had a meeting, or I sat there and had lunch with us three sitting together. And I feel like that changed my life. that changed my life. So activism comes in so many forms and so many different movements. And, you know, like once this fight's over, trust me, I'm gonna hop on another one. This work will never be done.
Yeah. And then another question is, what keeps you motivated? Have you ever got like, was there like a roadblock where there, you know, that like, you know, like you couldn't go past it? What would you do? Like, do you keep like just keep pushing forward, or has there been a point where you're just like, okay, this is it, then, you know, like give up, or you just keep going?
You know, I've came across a lot of reckonings like that for myself, a lot. During the pandemic, I'm like, do I go out there? Do I not go out there? You know, and that was a huge thing for me for a while. And I was like, I can't. And I decided that, okay, I will. And that was a personal choice. And I know that we talked a little bit about that. I think that another point, and a point that I really love that Pua Case made, who was doing activism in Hawaii. And she had said, for a movement or something that you know to be right in your bones, you have to be willing to stand by yourself. You have to be willing to stand by yourself. You have to be willing to be that person that's like, I am the only one that maybe might agree with this. That's okay. And I love that, because there are moments where I'm like, I'm coming across, whether it be a group of students or my family or whatever, and I'm the only one who's going to say something. I'm now known as the person like, oh, there Vanessa goes, right? Can't watch a movie with me because I'm going to be the one who's going to critique the hell out of it. But, you know, I had to be able to stand by myself in some of these instances and be okay with that. There were some times where I've gotten nervous and backed out, and my activism is not perfect. I know for the Maidu, which is a tribe up here, they have a museum that's Roseville, the city of Roseville, which is a very white city, defunded. They actually took away the funding away from the Maidu Museum. And I remember doing a lot of activism to be like, hey, we need this place. It was a native hub. We've often done events there, and we've congregated there. And it's actually on some of the Maidu sacred land that we go and do ceremonies at. And the city said that they're not going to fund it anymore. They're going to shut it down, almost like only keep it open a day. And there was a moment where I was like, you know what? I was going to go and protest it and do a sit-in. And I was like, I can't get arrested this weekend because I have shit to do. So that was a roadblock for me. I wasn't willing to be arrested.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for answering my questions. I hope you have a good day and keep up the good work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You too.
All right, guys, if you have any more questions, just feel free to throw them in our discussion posts. And if you want me to toss them at Vanessa, I can go ahead and do that for you guys. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and Vanessa for chilling in your car for like an hour and a half. Appreciate it. And it's always great to touch up with my colleagues from UC Davis. And we sent one of our girls up there from Diné College. She's working on her graduate degree up there. So if any of you guys are interested in the Native American Studies up over at UC Davis, it's a great program. Both Vanessa and I think, well, at least I think that the both of us have benefited tremendously from that type of critical thinking and academic activism. So yeah, I don't have anything else to say, but thank you, Vanessa. Would you like to add anything else?
I just thank you so much for inviting me and letting me talk about activism. It's my favorite thing to talk about. You can follow me on Instagram if you want to. I do a lot of like posts about Native activism that's happening. It's Nessie Ness 916. Or you just look at Vanessa Esquivido. I'm pretty sure I'll pop up. Yeah, just hoping if y'all have more questions, give them to Christine. You can, you know, send them to me as well. I know sometimes there's a lot that happens in the moment, and then you think of great questions later. So I am open to having further conversations about any of this. But thank you. I really appreciate your time, and thank you all for zooming in.
I know it.
You know, seeing our community, it's great. I love seeing.
All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. But you guys have a wonderful, wonderful day. Vanessa, have a great Friday tomorrow. And